What up, friends? I don't break hearts, I destroy them. And today we're going to be taking a look at Vince Staples' newest album, Ramona Park Broke My Heart. This is the 5th album overall by American rapper Vince Staples. Admittedly, Vince has always been an artist that I just struggled to get into. I can see the appeal, sure, and there are some songs that I was vibing with, but nothing really clicked with me all that much, unfortunately. This largely continues with this album. There's some emotional and captivating stuff on here, especially in the lyrics and the storytelling. However, a lot of it is just wrapped up in a box that I find to be very underwhelming in comparison to the subject matter. After a fairly naturalistic intro infused with some waves and smooth synths and bass, we get to the first track of the record, A, Free the Homies. The vibes of the intro largely continue with this one, and I think the sort of smooth instrumental style works well here. Having the simple snap beat and synth be contrasted by the vibrant vocals on this track was a very smart decision, I think, especially when the background vocals come in. Vince does sound noticeably drained here, and with lyrics largely talking about his past and his gang life, I don't blame him. There's a hint of nostalgia in this instrumental, I think, though, which kind of showcases how there was still quite a bit of good in Vince's past and in his life in general, which I think kind of encapsulates the complicated nature and relationship that he has with his history. The next one, DJ Quick, is one of the more underwhelming tracks, though. A lot of this album does tend to have the same vibe throughout, and this one largely just feels like a more stripped down and vibey variant of the previous song. The vocals don't have the lively and expressive background vocals to support them, leaving them feeling kind of lifeless and uninteresting. The beat is also fairly bare bones, with a muffled synth and a skeletal sounding 808 that don't really do much. There is an occasional glitchiness to the track that's kind of cool, and the lyrical themes are pretty engaging and emotional. However, the instrumental itself just isn't really doing anything. Magic, though, is probably one of the best songs on here, I think. That beat is seriously smooth, and the more dirty bass that we got going on here is really catchy. It's quirky, too, and the sort of swirling synth that we got going on here adds some nice texture to the track overall. I just love the way the instrumental sort of weaves its way into Vince's flows and the general beat on this one. It also showcases a rarer happy moment on the album, I think, with Vince kind of reminiscing about his youth and his interactions with his old gang. He also ties all of this back into his current success in spite of his hard past, which makes this lighter beat have a lot more of an impact, I think, especially when the piano and horn come in on the last chorus. Coming after the nameless interlude, we get When Sparks Fly, another fantastic track that features a sort of interesting lyrical dynamic between Vince and his gun being treated as a relationship. The echoing lo-fi beat and haunting vocal sample make this track immediately stand out, and I'm also really digging Vince's very vibey, yet also still very powerful vocal dynamic. It's kind of interesting to think about how he essentially made a love song for his gun, even going as far as to express that he made vows to it, and also how, when you first shot your shot, I knew you would be the one to hit the spot. It's a super creative track that just hits all the right notes, I think. Unfortunately, though, after this, the album becomes really spotty quality-wise, and a lot of these tracks just start blending together for me. East Point Prayer largely sees the beats starting to slip back into the very skeletal and bare bones aesthetic, and I find Vince's flows to be kind of mumbly and very monotone here. Sure, it fits the overall aesthetic of the record, but it's not a very interesting one. It also doesn't really do much different than what we've already heard on the record up until this point, and Baby doesn't really add much to the track either, I have to say, with his very sort of modified vocals over an already synthesized sounding beat. It's just not a very interesting combination. After a string of pretty uninteresting and safe tracks, we get to Player Ways, which I think is actually pretty engaging. The warm and almost twinkly beat are pretty interesting, I think, and Vince's flows largely keep the sort of heartfelt emotion while also tying it into the more funky groove of this song overall. The track does have a more sensual aesthetic and mood in comparison to a lot of the other songs on here, which I think is pretty fitting, as the whole track is essentially about Vince trying to cure and power through his depression through sex and hookups. It's an interesting sort of look at trying to get rid of the pain in any way possible. I also really like the passages where they sort of cut the beat a little bit and let the synth and vocals have their time in the limelight. It's a pretty fun little interaction there. Mama's Boy is okay, but it kind of represents my thoughts and problems with this album on the whole. There's some heartfelt and interesting arrangements and lyrics here, however, it's surrounded by these very static and skeletal beats and vacant vocals. I like the subtle horns and keys that we got going on here, but the drums just lack the texture and power that it's needed to properly convey the lyrical themes. It's like he's towing the line with being experimental and kind of standard. Like, he has these bits and pieces that are experimental, but the beat itself ends up coming together kind of just normal, which is unfortunate. It's like we have a few interesting lyrical themes and pieces that's tacked onto an otherwise average song. This is in fact a pretty big problem with the second half of this record in general. The last track I wanted to cover on here is The Blues, the ending track, because I do think it ends the album on a pretty good note. This is especially true as the song kind of calls back to the waves and naturalistic aesthetic of the intro to the record. The inclusion of the guitar and relatively sparse instrumental helps place emphasis on the guitar and also Vince's flows and storytelling. It's sort of like one last reminiscence about his past life before he moves on, and it has a kind of bittersweet aesthetic to it because of that. It's more of a spoken word poetry angle that's pretty unique for the project overall, and I think it does have a lasting emotional impact. Man, though, I just don't really know what else to say about this project, to be honest. It just felt very bare bones and underwhelming to me, and that's largely because of the production, unfortunately. The lyrics, more often than not, were very descriptive and painted a great picture on Vince's past and his life in general, but the delivery on this was just so boring and uninteresting to listen to. Like, I didn't even talk about quite a few tracks on the record because I just had nothing to say about them. They sounded so similar to everything else we've already heard. In fact, a lot of the songs on here have very similar vibes and very similar instrumentals to each other. Not many songs stand out from the crowd because of it, and they tend to lack the intricacy and intimacy in the instrumental that would help the narratives pop out even more. I feel like having more warm and textured beats instead of the trap-oriented ones would have helped avoid this problem. However, if he still wanted the dark and cold aesthetic of the record, he could have added a few more synth flourishes or some gritty dark bass and guitar like with The Blues to keep that vibe. I understand that the sound of this record might be to represent how tired and drained that Vince's past has made him, and I respect that. However, the delivery of a story is just as important as the content of a story, and I feel like the delivery of the story here made me actively disinterested in the content. Like, if Vince doesn't sound like he's emotionally invested in delivering these tracks and stories, why would I be invested in listening to them? If I had to sum it up, Ramona is an album with great songwriting and storytelling, but the most mundane way of delivering it. Unfortunately, because of that, all I can really give this album is a decent 5 from me personally. But of course we do have to talk about album covers on this show, and for what it's worth, I actually really like this album cover though. It has a really simple yet core aesthetic to it that I think matches the sound of the record perfectly. Just the simple pure black background with the sort of collaged and aged nature of the images on the cover. I think it's a very simple yet powerful way to showcase a look into the past and also prescribe some like homeliness as well. Like, even though it's a rougher past, there were still patches of, community and family and warmth, and I think that's kind of what this album is about. So I think the album cover at least did a great job of storytelling. But of course, those are just my thoughts on the album. What did you guys think? Do you think this is maybe Vince's best album yet? One of his most emotional? Or was this also fairly underwhelming for you as well? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell if you're gonna break my heart. And until the next one, farewell.